What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. Key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to get control of your thought processes, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are, guys, on episode 29. And in last week's episode, I was speaking with Mr. Duke Long from across the Atlantic over in New York City. And this week, I'm flying right back across the Atlantic, and we're landing in London for a conversation on the flexible office with a chap called Adam Blaskey. Now, before I go into that, I'm just going to give you a quick update. It's been a super busy week, and so I'm recording this late Sunday night, which is the last thing that I want to be doing on a late Sunday night. But I have been preparing I have a conference in Helsinki, Finland this week, and it was supposed to be a nice trip, nice junket where I'd be expenses paid, staying in a nice hotel. Instead, it's virtual. So this is one of the negatives of the virtual world, is that I still have to do the speech, still have to prepare, and I don't get any of the fancy stuff. So anyway, not to worry, I'm not complaining. Guys, if you want to join the Facebook group Behind the Facade community, it's there. It's a way of connecting with me directly if you have any stuff that you'd like to discuss. But let's get into the show, shall we? I'm going to tell you just how I came to meet Adam. Back in 2012, I had just moved back from Doha. I was living in Doha, Qatar, and I was working with somebody over there that was kind of a member of the royal family. So lots of money, lots of stuff going on. It was an exciting place to work, but I wanted to get closer to home because I could feel that the market was kind of bouncing back. And so I moved to London. I rented a flat in a place called Winchester Street, and Winchester Street is quite near to Victoria Station. And anyway, when I these flats they're quite small, they're not particularly large and stuff like that. So I wanted to find somewhere that I could work every day that would give me this kind of sense of being in a real busy workplace, right in the middle of all the action. And so I'd heard about this place, the Clubhouse, and I went over to have a look at it. It was over on a street called Grafton Street, and Grafton Street is just off Bond Street in London. It's right in the middle smack in the middle of all of the nicest shops. It's quite near to pretty much everything. You're right in the middle of it all. And it was this fantastic office, really, really flash, very, very professional looking. And it had meeting rooms, it had desks, it had kind of lounge areas. It was just brilliant. And it had phone booths that you could sort of sit in if you needed to do a private call. It had coffee machines, the coffee was free. And so I just said, I got to have this. So I joined up. And it was very reasonable price, considering where the location was. And that was the beginning of my discovery of the whole kind of co-working space and the flexible office space. I worked in this place for about a year, and during that time I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it was right in the middle of the action. You walk out the door and you're on Bond Street. And anyway, this is the story today. I'm chatting with Adam. He's the founder and CEO, or he was the founder and CEO of Clubhouse London. He built the business up to 4 locations over about 7 years, and then he sold the business to IWG. IWG is the international group that owns Regus, which is the flex office providers. So we're going to hear Adam's story of building it up and selling it off, and the business that he has since gone into now. So without further ado, Mr. Adam Blaskey. All right, Adam Blaskey. Good to see you, Adam. It's been a long time, and I just wanted to welcome you into Behind the Facade, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Likewise, it has been a long time. We first met each other a number of years ago, and it's great to reconnect.
Yeah, it is. It's good to connect. I just, as I'm going to paint a picture for our listeners, I was living in London back in 2012, and I remember coming across this cool co-working place called the Clubhouse. And I can remember somebody else actually told me about it and said, Gavin, you've definitely got to go and check that place out. So checked it out, became a member. I think I spent like every single day in there for a good couple of months. I was one of those guys that would arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning so that I got my table and I would set up for the day, and that was it. I wasn't moving off. But just for the benefit of people who don't know you or don't know the clubhouse, Adam, let's just begin with a little bit on your backstory. Paint us a picture, if you will, of your upbringing. Whereabouts in the UK are you from originally, and take us through, your early career. Where did you go to college? Things like that.
Sure. Yeah. So I was born in Sheffield. I then went to school in the Midlands, university in Birmingham. So I went to Aston University and did an international business degree. And I was always fairly business-minded from an early age. So I did business studies, economics and French A-levels, went on and did an international business degree, worked in France. In fact, France was the first place I ever worked after graduating, having gone to a business school in Paris for a while. And then came to London.
Right. Okay. And how did that provide you any kind of assistance with what you kind of got stuck into then, the property business and creating your own?
Yeah, I think it probably helped, and dare I say, hindered in a slight way, at the same time. So it helped. Certainly, it gave me a fantastic grounding in all the different aspects of business, whether it's organization, HR, marketing, finance, whatever it may be. But when you come out with such a balanced view, actually deciding which career you want to go in is not quite as easy. It's not as if I'd studied medicine and wanted to be a doctor, for example, or accountancy to become an accountant. So I always knew I wanted to do my own thing. Working for a large organization was never really my calling. I want to wake up and make my own decisions to a degree. And actually that really proved itself. So my first job was actually at UBS in the city as an equity sales trader, which, when you were young, fresh out of university, was a brilliant place to work. But equally, I thought pretty quickly, hey, I'm not suited to a large organization, a large corporate ladder that I had to climb, and I want to work, in an entrepreneurial way where I can make my own decisions and innovate and try new things.
Interesting, yeah. And so, how long did you spend in the big corporate before you branched out on your own?
Well, not really that long. So I was at UBS for a couple of years, which was a great place to be, at the turn of the millennium, and a great place to really witness cycles, I suppose, because that was, the dot-com boom that we all remember, and we all remember what followed afterwards.
Yeah.
And, it's a great grounding in understanding the big wide world and the influences that happen. And actually, it was during that time that I spotted a gap, I suppose, in the real estate market, and that was the kind of the dawn of, I suppose, prime central London development. So I kind of fell from banking into residential development, really at the kind of early noughties, as people were taking kind of branding and design into residential property in a way that just hadn't been done before.
Yeah, this would be kind of like, I suppose the big example would be the Candies or something like that. The kind of reputation they built for themselves around luxury and the whole brand and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. They were, probably the first real name to add that brand and leverage up the layers of value. And it's interesting. It's probably risky to draw parallels, but there was always a couple of big names that drive every sector. Whether they have any longevity is a different thing. But you look in the prime central London real estate, and actually they expanded all over the world. But yeah, the Candies were certainly at the forefront of that. Dare I say, in the way that Adam Newman and WeWork was in the flex space sector.
Yeah. You have to be careful with those parallels, all right. I was going to say, were there any particular influences on you during that sort of stage of your career? And I mean, what, if anything, stands out as a major influence?
I think, dare I say, when I was younger, probably the stereotypical names like Richard Branson was always an influence, just his attitude to try different things, and particularly in different sectors, and that mindset of never giving up, and recognizing you can try things in certain sectors, it might not translate to others, but that was certainly That's certainly an influence. When I was young and impressionable in property, I might have read some of Donald Trump's books, but I wouldn't necessarily advocate those now.
Jeez, I think I actually follow you in that. I'm almost too guilty to say it. But I bought when I was like a teenager, I think it was, I got Art of the Deal, and thought this was a great book, kind of a young, impressionable kind of teenager, wonderful learning from it. And now when you look at it now, you just kind of go, oh my God, head in the hand, kind of wondering, what were you thinking?
If you can pick up snippets from people along the way, you don't have to admire their whole career, but if you can pick up snippets, I think it's really, really important. And I think, the word that I've certainly learned from Donald Trump was tenacity. And I think in any form of real estate, in any form of, I don't particularly like the word entrepreneur, but running your own business, you have to have that degree of optimism in the way that Richard Branson did, and maybe the degree of tenacity that Trump advocated.
Yeah, it's true. And so tell us, when you were in the residential, the upper end, when did that kind of peter out? Was it around about the time of the crash that you kind of, like most of us, we kind of started to kind of look at different directions?
Well, not so much. As I said, I kind of fell into it after my banking days, really by spotting. I was living in London at the time. There was a probate sale that came up on the road that I lived on at the time. I thought, well, hold on, there's a bit of value between the house that I'm living in and that. So that was the first one. And I suppose I had a knack for spotting some space and being able to, to have some creativity and some vision as to seeing what it may look like. So that was the starting point, and we went from there to some much larger buildings in prime central London. And I did a number of projects for overseas investors, Middle Eastern investors, Far Eastern investors. But actually what slowly happened, and less to do with the financial crisis actually, but what really happened was that definition of the market changed. So that definition of prime central London, where you could pretty much, I think print money is the wrong thing to say, but it was a very tight geography, and it was a simple supply and demand imbalance. There was a huge demand for very well thought out residential developments and not very much supply of it. There isn't much space in prime central London, but actually the market changed. Yes, debt became harder to get hold of after the financial crisis, but in its place, financial innovation came, and there was enough mezzanine lending, and there was, if you wanted to develop, there was definitely ways of getting money. But I think the ability to get that premium in the way that you could previously, as £1,000, £2,000 a square foot, were now being achieved not just in the prime areas of Kensington and Chelsea, but south of the river, east towards Shoreditch. So it became a very different marketplace with with very a different number of players. So whilst maybe the Candys and some of the boutique developers were at the forefront, it was very quick that the behemoths like the Berkeley Group and the big house builders actually followed suit, because they realised that they'd had this business that was going fairly well, but they had to adapt to survive because their quality was being forced up by these new entrants. And I think there is a direct parallel between what's happening between residential and what's happening in the commercial real estate world.
That's very interesting. Yeah, good insight. So tell us, when did the clubhouse itself? What was the transition between what you were doing and then kind of getting it into your head that this was an opportunity that you were going to pursue?
Yeah, so from my development days, I built up a fantastic network of contacts, and then in around 2008, after the financial crisis, a lot of the professionals that I was working with in property, in banking, left the large organizations. So whether it was project managers and cost consultants, whether it was agents, left large organizations because overnight they realized that they perhaps weren't going to be compensated in the same way. They weren't going to be paid the big bonuses that they had in 2006, 2007, and probably thought, we don't have much visibility over the next few years. It's going to be tough going. And any professional who's built up a content book can effectively, jump ship and work for themselves. But almost, coincidentally, at the time of the financial crisis was the same time that the iPhone came about and the same time that the iPad came about. And actually, the iPhone first came to market in 2007. Dropbox was launched in 2007. The iPad came a couple of years later in 2010. So it was these remote technologies that allowed people to work differently. And so a lot of people that I was starting to work with, we were meeting in hotel lobbies and coffee shops and clubs in the nicer parts of central London. The Mayfair area is typically a kind of heavy property-centric area. And I was seeing all these people and having all these meetings, and I thought, if I'm going to grow my business, if I'm going to win clients, potentially look for investment, maybe, meeting the Starbucks is probably not the best place to do it. So hotel lobbies, coffee shops, weren't necessarily the right thing for me 5 days a week. No one had heard, the words WeWork or the word co-working back in kind of 2010, 11, 12. And I didn't need a service office 5 days a week, but what I did need is something that filled that gap. So the need was, my own, really. I saw lots of people that had the same need. And so we came up with a concept that filled that gap, really. Found some space to test the model on Grafton Street back in 2012, which is where we opened the first clubhouse. And it's where we met for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to clarify because we have an Irish audience here, and when you say Grafton Street, it means something very different here in Ireland. So Grafton Street, by that you mean the location kind of halfway between New Bond Street and Old Bond Street, basically.
Yeah, and equally, it's not the same Grafton Street that Ed Sheeran sang about either.
Yeah, which is the Irish one, I think. So,
yes.
Well. And tell us, so you built a pilot on Grafton Street, and how did you kind of go about structuring that from the outset? Was it it was a short-term lease left in an office in a commercial building?
No, we got a short-term lease. There was a previous tenant that ran into a bit of difficulty, so we were able to get a short-term lease. We had a landlord that was prepared to back the concept, and we went from there. I had residential property experience. We took a lot of the design from the residential world and the hospitality world to commercial for the first time. It hadn't really been done at that point, and it was really an idea that we evolved. But like the best things, it cost more and took a lot longer.
Yeah, like everything. It's funny you say that. It's one thing that really stood out for me when I walked into the clubhouse the first time was the quality of the design. And so, kudos to you. Tell me, in terms of building a brand around it, obviously you had the location. How did you go about creating a brand from starting at zero with the name Clubhouse?
Well, there are a number of different elements. The design that you touched on, and thanks for the compliments there. But I took the same approach as I did in residential. Any property development that I did in the residential days, I had to be happy to live there. I got fairly high standards, and I thought that if I took that approach, at the end of the day, it's a great way of attracting other people. So it's got to be a very high quality product. Generally, if things start to get tough, it's the ones at the top end of the value chain or the bottom end that do very well. The squeezed middle kind of lose their identity. So we wanted to be premium. It was a premium part of London, and we wanted to take those elements from hospitality where people were meeting, clubs and hotels, so it wouldn't be foreign, but also take the elements of an office environment, and really thinking about all of the different ways and different types of work that people do. And zoning effectively an open plan area through design and layout of different types of furniture. So whether it's soft seating for more collaborative setups, hot desks, for work between meetings, or just to get out of the home office, and then boardrooms and meeting rooms for whether it's strategy days, board meetings, investor presentations, and that kind of thing. And the branding was really important because I didn't want to come up with something gimmicky. I didn't want to invent a word. But I wanted to evoke quality, and I wanted to evoke the kind of neutral ground, that kind of third space that we were. And obviously, the clubhouse is very well known in golf terms, and it seemed to work very well as a kind of neutral premium proposition for what we were looking to do.
You did a great job at it, and to be fair to you, I was just going to ask you if you're happy to kind of share. Were there any early stumbles and challenges that you're happy to share that kind of just to kind of pass on the learning from those mistakes?
Lots. I mean, it's no secret that the acquisition by IWG last summer was not perhaps in the way that I wanted it to go, but we're very proud of the business that we built, and I'm sure it will do very well on the IWG platform. In fact, we were talking to them for a number of years, and I got to know Mark Dixon quite well ahead of that. But look, in any innovative concept, things take longer. They cost more, and I think one of the big reasons that the flexible real estate world is going so quickly at the moment is because the pace of change is rapidly accelerating. Companies are growing faster than ever before, but leases are somewhat inflexible. So we were at the kind of dawn of this new way of working. We'd take a lease, we'd agree a rent-free period, we'd model how long it would take to fill up our spaces, but it actually doesn't take too much for things to go wrong. If the lawyers take another few weeks to complete the lease, if it takes another week or month for tenders to come back, delays on site, these things can all stack up. So it's very, very tricky. And there were a number of operators innovating, and growth was what I think a lot of people were going for. And I think a lot of people were certainly following on the WeWork tails to grow and scale, and that's what we were looking to do.
And I can totally relate to the fact that you're dependent on solicitors and on contractors and designers and all of these different people to kind of deliver in a timely fashion, and you've got a rent-free that's kind of running out of steam pretty quickly. How did you go about customer acquisition and like getting people in the door once you did open? Was that an advance? Was that something that you were working on well in advance of it? And how did you go about building that community?
So slowly but surely at the start, it was always a case of building something that had a really quality offering with fantastic levels of service and the kind of service you'd expect in, the best hotels, because we knew that if people felt looked after, if they felt that was the right environment for them, word of mouth would spread. So the best form of customer acquisition was getting people in, having meetings, and then for every person that came in and met someone in the clubhouse, quite often they joined. So it was definitely a kind of member get member model, and then slowly but surely we grew from there.
And then when you went, and I remember I think you opened in Grosvenor Hill. Would that be right? That was the second.
That was the second one. In fact, we'd run out of space on Grafton Street. I remember. Instances we actually had people sitting on the floors on their laptops because we'd run out of space. And then it was really important to understand how people use that space, what their usage profiles were like. And that's where I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this in a few minutes, where the technology in running these platforms is really important, because you have to know exactly how people use that space. What the occupancy of your meeting rooms is, it goes without saying, but actually how people occupy a hot desk is equally important. So it's about getting that right configuration of space. We got it pretty much right, actually. We got more or less everything right in the first site. We just didn't have enough space. So we took an overflow site in Grosvenor Hill, which we opened in 2014. And that was brilliant to learn how to operate, the start of a multi-site operation.
And what size was that?
So Grafton Street was only 8,000 square feet, followed by 6,000 at Grosvenor Hill. But then we realized the sweet spot was really between 10 to 12,500 square feet. So when we opened down on St James's Square in 2016, that was 12,500 square feet, and the others that followed were of a similar size. And that was the sweet spot that really worked, because much greater than that, we thought that the levels of service that people really wanted, we might be able to deliver.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's finding that sweet spot's a difficult one, all right, when you're starting, because it's such a fixed thing, real estate. Like you take 6,000 or 8,000 square feet, and that's it. You've now got a lease, and you've got to make it work, whether or not you've actually found the sweet spot or not. And that's the struggle, isn't it? It's trying to figure that out in advance of signing off on the lease. And so you've exited the clubhouse, and you have decided to kind of go, and did you take time trying to figure out what the next move was, or did you immediately kind of have that plan sort of laid out?
Yeah, so as I was saying, our market has evolved. The service office industry isn't particularly new in it, in its sense. In fact, I was looking at some research earlier on, and I think the first brand in the service office or flex space sector was something called Omni Offices back in 1962. That became part of HQ, which is now part of IWG. And then you've got brands like Servcore and Lenta and Office Space in Town, which came along in the 70s. But fast forward, and the world is a very, very different place. So I was quickly approached actually by several of my former competitors after the deal went through. Some I knew, some I didn't know, but they were very keen to get me in, which was I was flattered by, and it was amazing to be given the opportunity to go into other businesses and really be able to get my head under the bonnet, if you like. And I quickly realized that, most operators were still facing the same challenges, whether it was around, the identity and what they were really offering, but really, again, kind of seamlessly matching the customer journey and customer experience that they wanted to deliver to their clients with the processes that they had implemented, because this is a new industry, in its current shape, although it dates back to the 60s, in the kind of co-working flex movement, which really only started, post the global financial crisis of 2008. It was evolving rapidly. So, there's no rule book for this. There's no piece of technology that delivers this. It had grown organically and became quickly an important subset of what is effectively the world's oldest industry, I think, real estate. I was approached by several people I knew, and given the opportunities to go and look and advise and see what was happening.
And so that's how it came about, that your business kind of the opportunities were just there to start advising, and so you've created a business that.
Yeah, and there's a few angles with Productive, and Productive Partners. So it launched just over a year ago, and Productive, it's called that for a simple reason, that one of the things that I've been thinking about quite heavily over the last 3 or 4 years is, why is it that with some of the fastest pace of change and the innovation and growth that we've seen over the last decade, particularly in terms of technology, why have developed economies stagnated in terms of their productivity growth? Productivity is just not caught up. And in growing a business like the Clubhouse and scaling it up, there's so many different challenges. And I think technology has been brilliant, but we're faced with a piece of software that does this, an app that does that, a sensor that does that. And I think the last 10 years were kind of tech overload for many people. As humans, our human brains, haven't really changed in millennia, but yet we've been forced to multitask and constantly check whatever's flashing up on our phone. So, in a way, what we've gone through in terms of coronavirus and the kind of the great reset, if you like, I think has been, fantastic for all of us, because it's allowed us all to kind of take stock as we're at the kind of dawn of the fourth industrial revolution, and really think about technology and what technology is going to be important to help us grow, and what technology isn't.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I can remember reading about WeWork that Adam Newman was big into the whole use of technology and how space was used and stuff. So it very much kind of reflects what you're talking about there. One of the big, I'm a big proponent of innovation and technology in real estate and stuff. I just believe that it's an industry that's been doing the very same thing for hundreds of years. If you took a builder from 100 years ago and brought him into a building site, a house building site today, I mean, he wouldn't be scratching his head wondering what people are doing. It would pretty much look the very same as it did like 100 years ago. You got bricklayers over there, you got guys laying, the foundations over there. It's not changed that much, whereas banking is like a completely different, thing nowadays. And so, I mean, I'm curious to know what your view is on the workplace of the future. I mean, what are the trends that you see kind of emerging in the market now?
Yeah, so in fact, just picking up on what you said about builders of 100 years ago, I've always been massively impressed about the quality and the scale at which the Victorians built houses, particularly in London. The attention to detail, whether it's brickwork or cornice work inside, and the quantity in which they produce them is phenomenal. And we probably couldn't do that today. So the real estate sector has had its head in the sand, for far too long. And I think actually we're at the dawn of something very exciting. So in terms of the co-working world, it's probably going through change. What I call kind of co-working 1.0 was the co-workers all in the early iterations of WeWork, and that was the kind of lease arbitrage model, which is slowly evolving and moving on, because landlords didn't get it, they didn't really understand it, but some innovators and pioneers came along and had no option but to rent space in a traditional way and divide it up. And as I said, it's not brilliant because things can go wrong and take,
as we've seen. Yeah.
And actually, if you think about it, you're adding most of the value to the property which you don't own. So it's completely wrong. Let's say you want to make a 20 or 25% margin. That means that 75 or 80% of your value is going to the landlord. Now that doesn't make sense. So fast forward a few years, and we're starting to see this. We started to see this a couple of years ago, but landlords really want to get get their heads around this. And you start to see a lot more partnerships coming between landlords and partnerships. So that's kind of co-working 2.0 or flex 1.0. We don't really call it co-working anymore. It's the flex sector. And I just wonder how long that will be around for. I think it's probably got a couple of years before, the landlords start to take control again. And that's because we are at, as I said, the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution. I think it's an amazing time for prop tech. We've all understood what fintech is. We've got, whether it's, new banking apps on our phones or whatever it is, but the fintech has been revolutionary for how we live our lives today. And I think that's now starting to happen with prop tech. And prop tech is an incredible sector. The technology's been there for a few years, but actually we haven't really understood the benefits. And it's by harnessing, I think, a lot of the data through platforms like the one that we built specifically for the flex space sector, is really bringing prop tech to the fore. But also, coronavirus has had, brilliant. So if they say every cloud has a silver lining, what coronavirus has been able to do for the property sector, moving beyond the fact that a lot of commercial buildings are empty at the moment, but we know that's going to be temporary, is people are realizing that CO2 levels have a direct impact on the productivity of the people occupying those buildings. So we're starting to think more and more that a building is not just an office where people go 5 days a week, but it's a building is a productivity solution. An office is a productivity solution, and therefore an inherent part of the value chain of the occupier. So we've got to understand a lot more about what that occupier does, what's the business it's in, what's it selling, producing, whatever, and how that office space forms part of it. So I think we're at a really major inflection point where people are wanting to understand more about the quality of the air they breathe, the benefits that biophilia within workspace brings. And part and parcel of that is prop tech. So whether it's sensors that can monitor air quality or occupancy rates, and provide that real-time data to those people that are providing space as a service. And the thing that always, confuses the hell out of me is you get into a car, you either turn a key or push a button, and the whole dashboard of lights comes up and it tells you, what the temperature is, how much fuel's in the tank. You set off and you can see how fast you're going. But there are buildings that welcome 5, 10, 20,000 people a day that have no idea how many people are walking through the doors.
Yeah.
They might have BMS systems, but chances are the BMS systems only looked at when somebody complains that the air conditioning's gone down. And how's that to run a building? So starting to use sensors and BMS systems and really visible data, bringing all of those different data points together through kind of one, in tech speak, as one kind of source of truth or one single pane of glass, I think creates a huge opportunity for the property industry.
Yeah, it's funny you were saying that because, the way I look upon the workplace, obviously the business park that I look after, we have about 1.5 million square feet. And so I'm used to seeing thousands of people coming in and how they use buildings and stuff. And prior to COVID-19, I could see that there was a huge push towards sustainability. There was a push towards wellness as well. So I would have thought that the two major, the major things that people were concentrating on were sustainability and wellness. After that, there was a kind of a distant one was flex. Now that we've gone through COVID, it seems like flex is taking more of a prominent sort of role in it. But I do think that wellness and sustainability are still going to be way up there in terms of importance. And my view is that COVID-19 has actually taught us that the warnings that we've been getting from scientists for the last 20 years about this is coming, and we all ignore it until it's too late. And there were warnings about a respiratory flu-like kind of thing happening on the earth and us getting impacted by it, and we all ignored it until we now see the cost of it. And so I think people are now waking up and saying, hold on, maybe we should think about what these scientists have been saying for the last 20 years and actually pay some attention to this, because I do think that that's where we're heading. Are there any, outside of those kind of three categories, where else would you say, have you noticed any particular interest from clients and focus?
Oh, there's a lot there, and it's a big subject. And I think, I remember when we started taking buildings and, I was looking at the marketing material of the building and it said it's BREEAM certified. And I was like, is this important to me? at that point, it's important to the landlord because they can tick a box and it looks great on marketing material. But I think there was a bit of a disconnect between BREEAM and the occupier, because environmental and sustainability probably wasn't at the forefront of people's minds in the way that it is now. And so that environmental and sustainability has obviously developed. ESG in itself is a big movement. And in terms of wellness, people's mental health and well-being has also been something that's been talked about, particularly over the last couple of years in a way that it's never been before. And actually replacing BREEAM in a sense was the well building certification. I think is brilliant. But for many people, again, there was this disconnect between, but what does it mean for me? What does it mean for me as an individual occupier? Not the person that signs the lease, but for the hundreds of thousands of people that work in that building. And so it's only through a big event like coronavirus, this kind of faceless enemy, which we're now trying to understand, which suddenly people are thinking more about the quality of the air that they breathe in a completely different way. So that's been good in terms of shining the light back on, BREEAM from a sustainability point of view and well from a well-being perspective. But in terms of flex, that was just on the way up as it was. Most of the big real estate agents were pointing to the fact that flex, I think accounted for about 6% of central London office stock, and probably the same in big metropolitan cities like New York, but 6% of office stock, prior to COVID. And the ranges of forecast were somewhere between 25 and 30% of office stock by the end of the decade. That's only accelerated. So we're going to see that much, much sooner. So there's definitely been an acceleration towards buildings that are better supportive of our well-being, better supportive of the environment, and better supportive of the way we work. But I think that's something that was already starting to happen. It's just been, a big acceleration.
In terms of, just to put the argument on the other side for a moment, just a lot of the stuff that I read about when we talk about, say, the collapse of the IPO for WeWork, and a lot of people were coming out and saying, that these guys, it's the mismatched periods. You've got, guys have gone and signed 15-year leases, but they've only got commitments from their members of, a month or whatever it is. And you've obviously been through this with your clubhouse, and how, in terms of from a purely landlord or an investor, property investment point of view, I can kind of see that argument. I can see how, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that somebody as soon as COVID hits, the flex office just empties and people have cancelled all of their memberships and stuff like that. And then, whereas if you've got a long lease of a 15-year lease to a multinational or something like that, they're still paying the rent, even though the building might be empty. So what are your arguments, against that argument? Having been in the seat where you were the operator, and how would you kind of counter that argument?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's completely the case. There are shops on the high street that are empty. There are department stores that are empty. There are offices up and down the country that are empty. But actually, the flex sector, the co-working sector, has performed much better than many people thought. Obviously, there was a big panic, back in March, April, when lockdown came in, and a few people were, cancelling their memberships. But after that panic was out there, most of the operators that I'm working with probably are at 70% of where they were, which is pretty good, considering the number of businesses that have gone out of business. 70% is a pretty good level to be at, given everything that's happening in the world. And because they can offer a range of flexible solutions, they've been able to show that flexibility to a landlord. Whereas I've been working with some corporate occupiers who've given up their leases, whether they were coming close to a lease event or just took the opportunity, but they've gone into flex because nobody knows how long this is going to go on for. They've got out of a long lease that their guys weren't actually using, and they've taken a much more agile approach to working. So, this has started to paint a great picture for the sector.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I've seen a shift towards the agile workplace, even with the multinationals, and they're starting to use technology that allows them to hot desk with staff working from home. And we've even had situations where I've been telling certain occupiers that they should be looking at the agile workplace, because they have policies in place where staff are coming in whenever they want, and work from home whenever they want, and yet they have a fixed desk in their office. So when they come in, they expect their desk to be there with their with their chest of drawers and everything where they left it, and yet they can go home for 3 or 4 days and not come in, and everything is meant to be just left there. Whereas the sense of agile working is that that desk begins clear, and the next person can come along, and you can end up with 3 times the number of staff working in a location of the same size.
Well, as I said before, this shift was happening pre-COVID. You just look at the decline in typical lease lengths over the last decade. Long gone are the 15 to 20-year leases that pension funds, who are typically the developers of a lot of office buildings, relied on. That is just not there. The typical lease length is hovering around 4.5 years, 5 years, I think, and that's because companies are growing at such a fast rate than before, fueled by technology. If a company cannot predict what its headcount is going to be in 2 years' time, then there's no way it can take a long lease. So, the traditional model has been going out the window for some time. And in its place comes a flexible, agile solution that, in boom times you can expand, and in leaner times you can contract. And there's always people to fill those gaps. Companies of different shapes and sizes. What I always liked about my old business is that we weren't putting all of our eggs in one basket. There were different levers to pull. So whether that's office space or meeting rooms or memberships or virtual office solutions, you could always pull different levers. And in fact, a lot of the advisory work that I'm doing at the moment is around those levers, and particularly the secondary revenue streams, which are growing in importance. So it's not just about office space, it's around memberships. And a typical occupier now might previously have taken an office for 20 people, but they're probably now going to take an office for 12 people and have 8 memberships alongside that. Because as we know from the kind of corporate approach to agile workspace, 100% of people aren't in the office all the time. And way before this, maybe they'd made allowances for desks for 70% of people. And that we're seeing, is certainly the case now, where, people are looking at a kind of a toolbox of workplace solutions, whether it's meeting rooms, memberships, virtual office solutions, whether it's a work from home or work near home solution. And I was reading the other day, there's been quite a bit of debate about work from home, work from near home, and so on. And there's actually 7 different combinations of work. Wow. So you can work in your HQ some of the time. You can work from home the rest of the time, or maybe you work in the HQ a couple of days a week and work near home in flexible workspace on a kind of hub and spoke basis. And then there's people that won't go to the office. They'll spend some time at home and some time near home. But then you will have the diehards that want to be in the office 5 days a week. You'll have people that don't want to be in the office, nor that they want to work at home, so they work near home. And then you'll have the flip side, which is only the people that work from home. So I know that's confusing, but there are 7 different combinations of work. So
it's all going to boil down to your tenant selection, really, I think, because I've been having conversations with a number of the occupiers in my business park, and one of the things that I learned, and they're very sort of outspoken about it, is that there would be no work from home from any kind of professional outfits, because they, for example, engineering companies or architectural firms and solicitors and stuff, so much of their business is dependent on training the graduates that cannot happen at home. They need to be exposed to the older, sort of more experienced professionals in the floor. And, just by sitting at a desk and overhearing your boss having a kind of an argument on the phone with another lawyer or whatever it is, that you pick up the nuances and stuff like that. And that's key to the education of the professional. Whereas there are obviously a lot of businesses out there that have more of a, I suppose, an administrative role, where sitting at home on a computer is just as effective as sitting in the office on the computer. And so it's going to be tenant selection. And then, as you mentioned about the growth, that's something as well that I've seen in some of the buildings that I look after. We have got tenants who are growing rapidly and they need space all of the time. But there's a lot of other tenants that have quite stagnant headcount, and they don't really grow by much. So I suppose it would depend on your the type of business that you're signing up for a lease. If you've got somebody who's kind of a long established business that provides kind of a service to somebody, and they're not one of these rapidly growing technology companies, then the likelihood is they'll be happy enough with a long-term lease, because they don't see their headcount projections kind of jumping massively like a technology company would.
And I think that's important to realise. Not everyone is the same. All companies are different. The types of work we are doing are different. We're in an era where you've got so many different generations with different demands in a workspace that's it just makes it all the more obvious that a typical bland office space is just not right for the way we live and work today. And understanding that, and understanding particularly how space is used, is why I think we're in such an amazing point in the kind of prop tech arena and the kind of fourth industrial revolution. And I think the generally accepted term of Industry 4.0 is the kind of automation of traditional practices using smart tech. So whether that's IoT sensors, AI, VR, which change the way we live and work, because we all want more choice. We all want to adapt. So fundamental to that is understanding what we need and providing more of it in a better quality. And the only way you can do that is to understand how space is used. And that's really the fundamentals of the workspace analytics platform that we've developed for the flex space sector.
And end on our conversation, I just wondered, are there any books or podcasts or resources that you rely on for this kind of thing in order to kind of improve your knowledge and stuff?
There's a great book that I think came out at the end of last year, Rethinking Real Estate by Dror Poleg.
Oh yes, Dror, yeah. That's a great book, all right, yeah.
It's fascinating. It covers every aspect of the real estate world, and is probably the closest thing to a crystal ball. I think that is a very good one. But I think equally the last 6 months have proved extremely valuable in terms of the debate that lots of commentators have had. And I've certainly not used LinkedIn as much as I've done recently to kind of be part of that debate and looking at different models, looking at different working practices. And we'll see what pans out, because as we've seen throughout this pandemic, there've been a lot of knee-jerk reactions. Some things that people were predicting already on proving to be the case. So it's probably too early to tell, but I think what is for sure is that people will relish flexibility and choice. People will relish a much more agile way of working to kind of bring a bit of work-life balance. Or I don't actually believe work-life balance exists. It's work-life integration.
Yes, I agree.
Because it's not.
I've had balance. Usually something is out of balance. Yeah.
Yeah, it's how we bring it together. And I think really it's opened up the whole conversation, because a lot of employers out there, they might have said they embrace flexible working, but it was still very much the kind of command and control environment. But what this pandemic has proved is that people can work from home. I firmly believe, I think as you were touching on, that people cannot be as productive as they are at home. People do rely on a workspace, and therefore that workspace now has to work really hard. It has to be the hub. It has to be a hub where people are attracted to. And so to be attracted to, it has to provide a great experience. And in that space is the experience for people to collaborate, to innovate, to strategize. And particularly for different generations coming together, it's important. If you've been in your career for 10 years, of course you can work from home. But if you're young and coming into the workplace for the very first time, you need mentoring. And that can't be done at home. You can't learn those skills which will become vital in later life. So people do need to get out. They do need a creative, inspirational place to work. And I think that is what the space as a service sector has done so well in the last few years. And I think will continue to do very well in the time to come.
Now I'm going to ask you a profound question, Adam. What's the best advice that you've received during your career?
Things will always take longer and cost more money than you intend. And I think anyone that kind of does their own thing has to be optimistic by nature. I think people, particularly in the real estate world, are optimistic because we take very big risks. Very much like the Romans, build it and they will come. We take enormous risks, but we are dealing with a lot of things outside of our control. So the advice I now give to myself is, only worry about the things that you can control. If you're doing the best you can about the things that are within your control, then that should hopefully give you a degree of comfort. There's no point worrying about things that you just cannot do anything about.
And if you had an opportunity to speak to yourself, your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give to that young Adam?
Another great question. I think you have to learn and bring in different things from different sectors. The world, the economy is so interlinked these days that just being driven with a kind of really headstrong view of one particular sector isn't the best way to do it. You've got to look at the influences, and I think that's certainly what I did in the early days of the Clubhouse. And now, I'm really excited about some of the prop tech solutions we're bringing, but it's bringing different aspects from different sectors. And I should have told myself that a long time ago, and that's the lesson I'm learning.
Brilliant. Adam, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. If people want to connect with you or reach out, how is the best place to find you? Where's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. So just search for me on LinkedIn, or you can drop me an email, adam@productive.partners. Slightly different spelling, which is PRODUKTIV, to bring a bit of Vorsprung Deutsch technique into it. Or the website
technique. Well, I'll put your email address and your website, stuff like that, in the show notes, along with a link to the Clubhouse, so that people can actually see the business that you created prior to starting Productive Partners. Adam, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Devin, it's been great. Really enjoyed that conversation.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mr. Adam Blaskey. Adam is now running a company called Productive Partners. And so if you go and check the show notes, I'm going to put a link to that and to the various things that you would have heard during today's episode. Guys, that's pretty much it. It's late on a Sunday night, as I mentioned, and so I'm not going to dwell too long on this. Just look out for the show notes, and then hopefully next week is going to be an episode with just myself, and I'm going to be going into some interesting topics, and I'm going to be kind of digging up some stories from my past, and so hope you'll tune in for that. That'll be episode number 30, which I did not actually think that I would get around to publishing 30 episodes, but it's going well so far. So that is it for episode 29 of Behind the Facade. Please, again, check out those show notes. And I'd like to thank you all for listening. My number one ask is, if you did find this useful at all, please consider leaving a review. The reviews are absolute gold dust for me. They get the word out there. They get more people to discover the podcast. So it's the one thing you can do, or you can just give it a 5-star rating if you don't have time to write the review and all that. If you have any questions, again, the Behind the Facade community is a great way to connect with me. You can also connect on social media. Gavin J. Gallagher is my handle for pretty much everything. I have, Twitter, YouTube, I have Instagram, I have Facebook. So any of those things there, if you want to connect with me, that's the place to find me. So guys, until next week, we shall talk to you very soon. Thank you.